bit late. And so I think we're just waiting on Christy.
I haven't heard from Christy. She usually tells me if she's not going to make it.
Okay. Wait just a sec more, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. I am going to call this meeting to order. It's 6:03 p.m. I'd like to announce that this meeting is being recorded. And Jonathan, can you call the roll? I think you're on mute, but I am here.
There we go. Director Brandt, you're here. Director Geis. Director Bertrand.
Here. He's here. Sorry.
No problem. Director Hedges.
Here.
Director Freeman.
Here.
Director Nguyen is absent, and Director Thurlow's absent.
All right. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the Chumash people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Chumash elders, past, present, and future, who call this place, Anaskoyo, the land the Islandista sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Chumash community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. With that, we'll move to the consent agenda. Does anyone have a motion?
I'll move approval of the consent agenda.
There's been a motion made. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. Any public comment? Any further board discussion? All right. Jonathan, can you do a roll call vote?
Yeah. Director Brandt.
Yes.
Director Freeman.
Yes.
Director Bertrand.
Yes.
Director Hedges.
Yes.
Director Geis.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0 with 2 absences. Okay. We're going to go to the public comment period. So this is the time for members of the public to speak on any matter that is within our subject matter jurisdiction that is not on the agenda. So any members of the public have items they wish to speak on that are not on the agenda? Okay. We're going to go ahead and close the public comment period. Okay, we're going to move to discussion action items. Our first 2 items, the police brutality and anti-racism work group update and the discussion on contracts with law enforcement agencies, I think go hand in hand with one another. And so while we don't have an update from the anti-racism work group as it pertains to any resolutions, we did want to have a discussion on the implementation of the resolution regarding the law enforcement contracts. So I want to hand it over to Jonathan sort of to introduce this item.
Okay. 4.1 or 4.2? Because we have a needed discussion on 4.2, 4.1 as well.
4.2 first.
Okay. So 4.2 kind of follows off of what we did in Resolution 20-9 and will be the first of many discussions that are alluded to in the description of 4.1. But it's a discussion on our contracts with law enforcement agencies. Right now, we only have contracts with the UC Police Department, which are linked on the agenda. The current contracts. One is expired now, and one is in an amendment phase for the interpersonal violence investigator. The safety station one expired at the end of June. So the first discussion we'd like to have and get direction from the board on how to move forward with this is the board did pass in resolution 20-9. It required that policing services contracted by the district promote racial justice and equity. And so there isn't a lot of definition to that yet. And so that's what this discussion would like to get direction on what the board is thinking on that. And we can develop more outside the meetings, but we thought this would be a good first discussion where we can start talking about how we can use our powers and our contracts to promote racial justice and equity. We don't have a contract yet with the SBSO, the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office, but the board had voted to move forward with negotiating a contract for the social media intern. And so there's no draft attached to this because it doesn't exist yet, but the discussion here will also inform how we move forward negotiating that contract as well. And we probably want to bring that item back anyways to discuss that again. But we're going to use your input right now to inform our negotiations. And to remind you, the term we extended the investigator to was the end of August 31st. And the safety stations are out of contract right now. We usually start them up again in August, but it doesn't seem like we will be even able to do that this year with CSO staffing levels, but we still need to talk about that more with UCPD. So that one might end up becoming on a slightly different timeline just based on what is able to be done. But either way, we'd like to negotiate the contracts this summer while we have time and while they're in this mode where they're extended or expired before we get the new ones. So that's what we're looking for as a discussion today is how can we use these contracts to promote racial justice and equity in policing services.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Jonathan. I'll open discussion up for the board in just a second. I've got my thoughts on this, but I also want to defer to others as well if they have anything to mention.
Yes, Mr. President, if I may.
Go ahead, Ethan.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank staff for bringing this forward, and as well as UCPD for working with us on making these amendments. I think this is a really great opportunity for us to take a first step of official action to making sure that our public safety services reflect the values of our community, and most importantly, that they are carried out in a manner that promotes racial equity. As a starting point, I think that one way that we accomplish this is in our contracts, having a provision that requires and is an agreement for the law enforcement agencies to conduct a community outreach process, specifically with underrepresented groups in Isla Vista, particular to the service. So example for our interpersonal violence and sexual assault investigation program, having the investigators who work on that program identify community groups that are relevant to promoting racial equity and meet with them, learn more about their priorities for safety in Isla Vista and how law enforcement can work with the community to create a service that's in line with a holistic approach to safety and keeping all Isla Vista residents safe and healthy. So that's just one area that I think we can specifically call for as far as outreach to these groups and input. Additionally, I know that there are many different implicit bias trainings and racial equity trainings that take place. It would be great if we learn more about the specifics of that and incorporate that into an agreement like this as well, just for public transparency and also accountability so that residents of Isla Vista know what training their law enforcement officers are going through and can also provide feedback on that. So those are just two starting points.
Thank you for that, Director Bertrand. Any other members of the board wish to speak? I'm going to go over to Director Friedman.
First, a question. So are we focused right now on the a short-term contract update, or are we also intending to talk about longer-term contract restructuring or things like that today?
I think we're focused on the short-term contract update.
Cool. Yeah, one of the struggles that I've had trying to come up with something to inject into this contract is the idea that it's difficult to just directly mandate something. And so, for example, that there will be racial equity in the policing and the occurs in Isla Vista. And so there's this issue of then also sorry, I got distracted for a second. Also, in addition to having a thought that I was trying to put together on the fly, trying to figure out what would happen if we think that something didn't work, right? So you think about like general things with contracts is that you've got some kind of weird agreement that is made that each party will do something, and then you've got some kind of consequence that will happen if the parties don't do that thing. And so I'm also trying to think through like, okay, so how are we going to define the thing that we want them to do in such a way where we can determine pretty clearly whether they did it or not? Because if nothing else, they're going to want to know, well, when I take this action, am I violating your contract or am I not violating your contract? And then figuring out what we expect to happen in the case that we think that they did violate our contract, what recourse we might have. It's been a struggle for me to think about what to do here. Sadly, I'm just bringing up more interesting questions as opposed to coming up with good answers. But
Thanks, Director Freeman. I guess what I'll say is, for starters, the main thing that I've been thinking about has been an issue that Director Bertrand brought up, which is that oftentimes we're told that law enforcement participates in various types of racial equity and cultural competency trainings, but we don't always get great information or thorough information on what exactly those trainings are, how intensive they are. And I think that it will be very beneficial if the public is able to know what those trainings are, and possibly if it is sort of a curriculum that is widely accessible, then maybe members of the public can actually see what that is and sort of undertake a version of the training themselves to see what it is that our law enforcement officers are sort of going through when it comes to the training. And so I think that should be definitely something for all of the different types of employees that we have, meaning if we have a communications related intern, if we have a detective as we do, or our community service officers, I think that that should apply to all different classifications. And in addition to that, I like the suggestion that Director Bertrand also brings up in addition to that as well. So any other board comments?
I guess I'll respond to Director Freeman's suggestions and thoughts about just what does accountability look like in this regard. And I think that's a very good point to bring up. I think that when we do move forward with establishing this specific criteria and approving it, it is a mutual agreement that we're entering into with these law enforcement agencies, just like any other provision of our contracts and taken with the same amount of seriousness. So we would obviously want to work with them to come up with points that are mutually agreeable. And there may be some points that they bring up for us to consider and points that we bring up for them to consider. But ultimately, when we do arrive at mutual agreement, we're going to have to hold each other to those provisions that we agree to, just like we do any other parts of our service agreements. And if there are times when we're not sure about the compliance, or if they have feedback on how the program is going, I think it's important for us at these meetings to to dive into that and just make sure that we are fulfilling whatever agreements we arrive at.
Any other board discussion, or I'll go back over to Jay.
Has there been any even like vaguely preliminary thought or discussion, like any interaction between us and the Sheriff's Department and or UCPD or anyone related to any of this?
Just a little bit. We talked right before the end of the fiscal year or beginning of the new one 2 weeks ago now, where we went over the short amendment that we had approved on June 25th, and I kind of, I clarified that amendment did not include what we're talking about now, because it was, more about goals we had already discussed before our resolution had passed. So I clarified that, and I did talk with Justin and Ariel last Wednesday. I caught them up on what the district has been doing, and the different actions we had taken, and told them that this was a process that was going to unfold soon. And that's about it.
Okay. Any other thoughts or discussion on this item?
I guess I'll just say in closing on this item, I think our number one goal in this moment and with this provision specifically is how do we work with and empower our law enforcement agencies to be good allies to Black and Brown community members. And I think that that's something that many communities are working on throughout the country and throughout the state. And I think when we look at this issue from that perspective of building good allies, it's really helpful because it involves learning, it involves understanding, and it involves accountability.
Thank you for that, Director Freeman.
That was
I'm
Bertrand.
sorry, Director Bertrand.
Before we jump too quickly into closing wording, maybe the public will reinvigorate a conversation among us. I'll point out.
It's very possible. I think we'll do that now. We'll open up public comment. Is there any comment from members of the public on this item? Yes, we have a comment from Luisa. I'm gonna go ahead and go over to you. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Luisa. I'm here from the EVPLA office as a CSD. And I was just wondering if once the resolution, sorry, I'm a little flustered. Once the resolution is made, could it be like placed for students the way that there is the like online, like I'm about to be a second year. So from my freshman year, I had like the alcohol and substance abuse online training. Could it be implemented that way for students?
Are you talking about the an outreach process?
Yeah, like an outreach process and like teaching students about like racial equity, because I feel like it's not as openly displayed, I guess. Like when teaching it, I feel like it'd be really useful to have it implemented that way, as like everyone has to take it the same way that we have to go to the substance abuse and like alcohol meetings and training is online.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we may be talking about something a little bit different, but I completely agree that it's incredibly important that any orientation, I guess, of new community members includes equity, and that is first and foremost. And we're focused right now on the law enforcement side of things and how we can ensure that they have training that includes equity, that includes racial justice. But I think that that's important as well. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
I see in the chat that we have a comment from Julia. I am going to go over to you.
Hi, thank you. This is just the second IVCSD meeting that I've attended. But to my knowledge, that this discussion with this contract is about the contract with specifically the role that CVSD is funding in the UCPD office, which is the sexual assault person who is addressing those problems within IV. And I'm not sure if this is a little late to the game to be bringing these kinds of thoughts to it, but I recall from the last meeting there was a lot of discussion of turning over jobs or defunding the police and turning over jobs that would be to the police over to people who are not police officers and who are not affiliated with the police, and having those kind of roles be fulfilled by people who are social workers or mental health workers. And I'm wondering why that is not being implemented in this case, and why this has to be a role that is done by the police when so many of the conversations have been about defunding the police and even towards abolishing the police. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other requests to speak on this item?
I'll just say that I think we're going to touch on that broader discussion a little bit when we go back to item 4.1 on the larger anti-racism update.
Any other public comments? Okay. Or is that a hand that I see from Carmen? Can't quite tell. No? Okay. I'll bring it back to the board then. I think this has been a good discussion, and may want to move in the direction of a motion that includes some of the things we've talked about.
I'll make a motion to direct staff to return to the board with recommendations on racial equity provisions to include in contracts with law enforcement agencies for further consideration and development.
I will second that motion.
Okay.
I
Made by
lost
Bertrand, seconded by Freeman. And then, Director Freeman, do you have something you were going to say too?
Yes. I wanted to address these. So one of the things that's going on here with respect to the defund the police and the scope of this conversation sort of thing is that there was a contract that was up for renewal essentially in the middle of as we're having these conversations and arguments. And so the question became, how are we going to deal with that contract renewal? And so we have a temporary extension that we've put into place. And so the question of, okay, well, would we on relatively short notice entirely restructure how we do that? I mean, I even to the extent to which I am very excited about the idea of trying to restructure everything, the idea of on such rapid notice is a little concerning to me. I would like to figure out what our actual plans are relating to this, figure out how we can get alternatives in place, particularly since there was such a strong need in the community for this something to happen with relation to sexual assault and domestic violence. And so we attempted to fill that need and to, I mean, the thing that we could do quickly is to just rip it away, but we can't quickly put something in its place. And so I'm very supportive of this idea of trying to figure out an incremental improvement today. And then as part of our, as Ethan then mentioned, a wider conversation that we'll get back to on the other agenda item, look into what we can do in a broader context in the future and as far as shifting things around. I also will say, I mean, maybe this is the kind of honesty level of thing that maybe is not particularly common and sort of thing, but I find it somewhat difficult actually to have that many conversations about the sexual violence assault position, because I mean, I'm a cis white male, large. I mean, I'm the looming thing that walks down the street that you get afraid of and go to the other side of the street. And so I've never even experienced the problem, right? And so the extent to which then that I kind of sit and poke at that position and be like, well, maybe we should defund that position and change how it works and everything. I end up in this really awkward position of like, well, see, maybe it's not really my place to be poking that hard at that thing. You know, I would really want to be very sure and get a lot of good input from a lot of the people who were actually very affected and the people that we had tried to put this position in for, which was in some sense also a reaction to demands from the people on campus. I can't remember the name of the group at the time. I remember one of the key people's name was Roe, with relation to demands of local public safety issues. And so this is a hard one to work on, and I think that this incremental work now, and then try to have deeper conversations internally and with the community in order to what we want to do going forward is what I've been supporting.
Thank you, Director Freeman. I'm going to go to Director Hedges.
I was very much encouraged when Ethan used the language of alliance in this conversation of reaching out to allies, building alliances, and particularly on this matter of our response to sexual assault in our community. One of the critical needs was not just for us to have good ideas about this, but to have those good ideas be enforceable, to have them be something we can deliver healthier outcomes than we've seen in the past. And to desire healthy outcomes in something so critical as that requires that alliance somehow, I would submit, with law enforcement. Hopefully it will be awakened law enforcement that is more sensitive to things that it perhaps hasn't been in the past, but their presence at the table, God love us social workers and psychologists and all the rest, but there is, with some of these matters, you really have to have some teeth. And until we have a better mechanism for that, and I believe we can come to a better one as time goes by, we will need to continue to build those alliances, to write those contracts, and work together, I believe, with law enforcement, particularly on the difficult matters like sexual assault. And so to arbitrarily just say, well, we're going to defund that one with them and throw it to others might be a little premature. Perhaps that may be the outcome in the future, but I would encourage caution on that one until we build better plans.
Thank you, Father John. So if there's no other further board discussion, we have a motion on the table, and I actually don't have the text of the motion in front of me. I think I don't have the minutes open, but Jonathan, can you read that back to us?
I missed the last few words, but I think I got it accurate, but correct me if I'm wrong. It's motion to direct staff to return to the board with recommendations on racial equity provisions to consider in contracts with law enforcement.
Yep, for further consideration and development. That way, so the community will have another chance to weigh in as well.
Perfect, yeah.
All right. So with that, I think we'll call the question. And Jonathan, can you call the roll?
Yeah, sorry, I lost my role for a second. Director Brandt?
Yes.
Director Geis?
Yes.
Director Bertrand?
Yes.
Director Freeman?
Yes.
And Director Hedges?
Yes.
And is that it? And Director Brandt?
I think you got me. I mean, yes.
I think
Jonathan, will you show that I abstained?
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought you were recused from this one totally, but
I was recused and I jumped in not knowing that you were in the middle of this one. Sorry.
no worries.
Okay, so motion passes 5-0. Looking forward to seeing that coming back in the future. Okay, so now I think we can jump into item 4.1, which is sort of just a follow-up from the discussions that we've been having about how we can promote more racial equity in policing and how I think more broadly we can grapple with the new realities of the day. We sort of have these twin crises, one of a public health emergency, which has changed a lot of the way that public safety and the justice system has been operating. And we also have the crisis of racial injustice, which has been something that has plagued our society for far too long. Indeed, since the inception of our very nation. And so I think that it's important that we grapple with that here in Isla Vista, and think about the ways that we can transition all of the different components of the enforcement and justice system, whether that's law enforcement, whether that's what happens after someone gets arrested, and to try and make that something that is gets more buy-in in the community, and is not as focused around enforcement. And so I think one of the things that I think wanted to talk about is sort of our approach of starting to bring some of these items to the board for further discussion in their own on their own merits per se. One example of this would be the idea of sobering center. There's the discussions that happened a number of years ago about opening a sobering center for Isla Vista. Now, over the past year, the county has opened a sobering center that's on the county campus. How can we ensure that our residents and that they're able to utilize those services, and that the law enforcement system is diverting people away from the jail system and into that system when it comes to Isla Vista and some of the arrests that take place here. And so additionally, is there a need for heightened services? Is there a demand for those heightened services? Those are all questions we need to have, and that I think we should have discussions on. So I think it'll be useful process-wise if we sort of discuss these things, agendized on their own merits. And I just sort of wanted to get feedback on that direction from the board today. And that's just one idea out of many. We've also talked as a board about the ideas about how can we better respond to issues that occur that are nonviolent crimes. Is a law enforcement officer with a badge and a gun the right person to be responding to crimes like that? I would say no. And I think that a lot of law enforcement officers would agree that they are not always the best equipped to handle some of these mental health crises that they respond to, or that some calls for service do not rise to the level where they are actually a public safety problem. They are more of a neighbor or tenant disputes, and law enforcement is called in to sort of officiate. And I think that as we've seen across the country and heard many testimonials about from our residents here, oftentimes it has the effect of inflaming the situation or escalating the situation rather than de-escalating it. So, but again, we want to, I think, have conversations about these things specifically as a board, and wanted to get everyone's feedback about that as a way to move forward. So I'll open it up for other discussion. I see a hand from Director Freeman.
And I'll add to that. I think one of the benefits of this approach, which is something that I'm torn it a little bit, but this is something that I was one of the people who put forward the idea of doing this approach. So it's not like I'm reacting to the approach. I'm like, is the idea that the large resolution with all of the issues bundled together, when a lot of them are really complicated, finicky conversations, is something that, at least at the last meeting, looked like was going to end up becoming lots of arguments over lots of individual text points, and that by separating each one of them and allowing that individual conversation to essentially be individually agendized, it can make certain to separate out and over time and almost enforce that we discuss those points. And so rather than a giant document comes up and we spend a bunch of time arguing about one sub point, and we're not necessarily willing to, let's just break it apart and then concentrate on the different sections separately, and then bring forward some more structured plans for each of them, which for what it's worth was also what when we'd set up the working group, I was kind of thinking that we would have more structured plans. And so it's just, yeah. So what this means though is that this is going to just end up being a conversation that we keep coming to. Instead of being something that we do today, it's going to be something that over the course of the next 3 months, maybe, who knows, every meeting, we're going to have a relatively, hopefully hefty agenda item talking about some deep aspect of this plan if we go in this direction. So, and yeah, so I'm curious, as Spencer, what people's thoughts on this strategy are versus the let's tackle it all strategy.
Thank you, Director Freeman. Other board members have feedback for the discussion?
Yeah, I'll just say that I appreciate coming forward with some of the specific items that we can take action on to really affect change. I definitely think it's good that we name the issues of the day and are explicit in our commitment to standing up for Black lives and standing with our communities of color, which we've done and will continue to do. But I'm really excited when we can talk about actually taking action to get services up and running and make sure that we're actually doing things to advance the cause. So I'm definitely encouraged by us having a discussion about how do we better handle a lot of the arrests and citations that we see in Isla Vista through something like the Sobering Center. There is a Sobering Center that's been established earlier this year, and COVID-19 really changed the nature of the service, but it is there, and we need to make sure that Isla Vista residents are getting use out of it when necessary as an alternative to an arrest. Additionally, I think that a lot of our efforts as a district and a lot of what we've been formed to do is very much in line with the defund the police movement, in the sense that we are investing in community programs that make our community safer in a holistic way, by improving lighting, by making it more walkable at night, by making improvements to community programs that strengthen our community and make us more resilient, by providing services to some of the most vulnerable community members. To me, that's all very much in line with the defund the police movement, where we still do have contracts with law enforcement agencies, and we need to look in the long run to how we improve those contracts and appropriate opportunities for us to have some of those contracts with community-based organizations or other non-sworn law enforcement providers. I think that's definitely a conversation to have. But I'm really encouraged to how we can, by looking at our services through an equity lens, take this moment to just really be strategic about how we're making Isla Vista safer in a way that's racially equitable. Additionally, like one thing that I would like to see us do going forward is really look at the numbers behind some of our public safety concerns in Isla Vista, numbers and statistics about crimes and people getting hurt in Isla Vista, medical emergencies. And let's actually think about how we currently address them, primarily through the use of law enforcement response, and start thinking about what are the specific things that we can be doing different, what are the specific causes of some of these safety concerns, and how can we approach this differently. I think that by looking at those numbers and those specific situations and circumstances, that also puts us on a pathway to really making change. So I'm encouraged by us continuing to talk about this, and I think it is good that we're speaking about specific services.
Thank you, Director Bertrand. I'll just follow up with that. I resonated with something you said at the end of your statement, which is earlier today I was reading the impact of the COVID pandemic on the county jail population report that was released by the sheriff's office, the district attorney, probation and public defender's office, and it mentions that as part of the COVID pandemic, calls for service in Isla Vista have gone down, but we don't really have any way of actually seeing detailed statistics of, I guess, what's going on from both a calls for service perspective, but also from an arrests and citations perspective. And I would be really curious to find out that information to see how the alterations in law enforcement strategies that are currently taking place are impacting, our community. I know, sort of anecdotally, just when walking around, I feel just as safe now as I did in January before the pandemic, as I did, months before then. So I don't know if others share those same feelings when it comes to safety, but we'd love to. I think I'd really like to see the statistics of how that actually bears out, because we know that there are less people being arrested and cited just across the board on a county level. So I'm not sure if there's any way that we as a district can play a role in trying to spark those conversations and get that data in order to better inform our decisions as well.
And I want to comment on something you just said there, Spencer, as far as while there has been a reduced law enforcement presence in Isla Vista due to COVID, people still feel safe. And I do think that's important to recognize. There are certainly, and I want to be clear about this, there are certainly incidents that right now, with the current way that we respond to public safety issues, there are certainly incidents that require law enforcement response. But that's not everything. And I think what we have seen in the past couple of weeks is people have been safe. Law enforcement has been able to respond to Isla Vista when necessary. And there are some proactive patrols as well. And people still do feel safe. But I also want to mention, as a person of color in the community and in my conversations with other people of color in the community, over the years, the times when there's been a increased presence of law enforcement or saturation patrols, and especially on the weekends such as Deltopia and Halloween and other high activity weekends, those are times when some members of our community do feel really unsafe. So I just think it's always good for us to remember that as well. And even when our law enforcement officers have the best intentions, and even when they are doing incredible work, we always have to remember that not all community members can feel safe with a high level and very visible law enforcement presence. So I think that's always something that we're going to grapple with in these conversations going forward. And to the community members who are asking, hey, where are all the law enforcement officers? I definitely want to have a conversation about what are the issues that make you feel unsafe, and how do we best address those? And for many of those issues, it may involve law enforcement response, but also seeing what else we can do to holistically make our community feel and be safer.
Can I respond?
Thank you, Director Bertrand. I saw that Director Freeman had a hand, so I want to, okay, I'm going to go to Director Thurlow and
I totally appreciate and support, Ethan, what you have said. My only point would be the major crime in Isla Vista is property theft, okay? Bicycles, computers, burglaries. That's the major crime, and it impacts a lot of our constituents. Now, I think historically, and I'm talking about 40 years, historically progressives have somewhat overlooked the impact of crime in the pursuit of principles. And they've overlooked the impact of crime on their constituents. And as a result, conservatives have dominated the crime issue. And I believe because they progressives have sort of very much ignored the impact. And I would just bring up if we're going to talk about crime in Isla Vista, we need to talk about theft. And I know that property theft probably isn't a major issue for progressives, but let me tell you that in a community that has 40% of our folks are first generation, the theft of a bicycle or the theft of a computer or the theft of the month's rent has a huge impact. So as we go forward talking about crime, let's make sure we don't forget that the number one crime issue among our constituents is theft, property theft. And which is why I'm a huge proponent of Neighborhood Watch, which I hope is one of the many positive outcomes of this work group. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Thurlow. And I did want to pop in and say, I hear you on the theft. I think I've had more bicycles stolen than I can count. Actually, I had a laptop computer stolen 2 years ago. And when that happened, went through the process of reporting the theft to law enforcement. And practically what that meant was that if the laptop showed up on the black market, Apple, knowing that it had been stolen because of the police report that was filed, would shut the laptop down and turn it into essentially an electronic brick. However, the presence or lack of presence of law enforcement did not have any bearing on whether or not that occurred. The reason that my laptop was stolen is because we left our doors unlocked. And so I think that you're absolutely correct that we need to be conscious of those who have been victims of crimes. But we also have to think in a goal-oriented way if certain steps are going to achieve that goal or not. The other thing is that one of the things that the report found is that burglary is actually down across our county right now, even under the COVID pandemic and under the current alterations that law enforcement has made to reduce the amount of people that are arrested and cited and put in jail. And so I think it's really important that as we move forward, we think about it from a data perspective, as well as sort of is this making our community members feel safer? I see a hand from Director Freeman.
In addition to the comments I was going to make earlier, which I'll put off for a second, I would like to really underscore and support a lot of what Spencer was just saying. So the and I also would like to say that from my interactions with law enforcement officers in the area in Isla Vista over the course of the last 6 years, I think they would actually agree too. There have even been campaigns that are run by the Foot Patrol about locking your doors, because no one really locks your doors. And the Foot Patrol, it essentially like determines that was such a fundamental cause of theft in the area that it was almost a better use of their time, which is then a weird thing. You think, okay, well, that's what we're having the law enforcement agency do, doing a public outreach campaign, getting like logos and stickers for like a safer IV if you lock your doors or something like that, and like trying to like really figure out how they're going to, maybe they should start running events. It's interesting the perspective of which it's the best way of attempting to of even the law enforcement figuring out how to solve the problem was convince people to lock their doors. And an anecdote on that. So when I was going around campaigning for various things 4 years ago, I'm a night owl. And so I go around in the middle of the night. I also I hate the sun, I sunburn easily. And so I'm out in the middle of the night going around hanging door hangers on all the doors. A lot of doors aren't even closed. Like you come in the middle of the night and the door is just open. There'll be doors that don't even have knobs. They can't close and latch even in the first place. And I actually feel that we have less theft in Isla Vista, given how inherently trusting we all are of each other with open doors and than you experience other places. I have some friends who had a bunch of their stuff stolen when we were in college, and they lived on DP, and their story was that they were all playing video games, and some people, and their door was open, some people came to the door and were like, hey, and they were playing video games. They were like, hey, and then people kind of walked into their house and they were like, oh, this is all going to be friendly. This is going to be fun. They're going to maybe play video games with us. And they talked for a little bit, and then they were playing video games. And then a little bit later, the people waved and said, hey, bye-bye. And they left. And then they realized all of their laptops had been stolen because we are almost so gloriously, in some sense, safe that I think that our extremely high theft numbers are just due to how easy it is to steal from us because we're so trusting. But I hesitate to think that just by having lots of cops on the street that it solves those problems. I mean, it wouldn't have solved that problem. I think that the people who are going around stealing bikes occasionally in the middle of the stories of people who show up with a truck and then just like clear out bikes throughout the area. It's not clear to me that that would be that easily stopped by having patrolling police, because you just have a couple other extra people in order to watch where the police are, and then you just don't steal in that area. And so I don't know. Using that particular item as a defense for make certain there's lots of police in the area and strategies, I'm not certain. The neighborhood watch thing, which is where George did end up going with that, possibly. Although there's also, I mean, it was even like Ariel was in one of the meetings I was in recently pointed out that neighborhood watch is also a kind of organization, like not organization, but a kind of organizational structure that has been associated with weirdly racist tendencies, and that's not necessarily the solution that everyone's going to end up feeling comfortable with, but at least defined in that particular way. But so I wanted to go back to then I think there's some interesting things came out way back when Ethan was talking about like things that we could do if like we knew more data, for example. It's actually something that like also Carmen had brought up, the idea of having a really get the data and try to do a data-oriented approach on all this stuff. And I like that. And one of the things I think that we need to figure out, though, and this is also, this kind of came up immediately after what Ethan was saying, is that we need to figure out how we're going to get some of that data. And maybe that's to tie back into our previous conversation. That's the kind of thing we should stick in one of our contracts, is to say, you know, we'll work with you on these things. We'll pay you money for the stuff we want to, but we also want to get better data reporting out of you, and we want to get the ability to ask for these statistics. Because in the past, when we, for example, tried to dig into that because we were curious about the arrests that occurred during, for example, Halloween, we're trying to figure out, you know, different groups of people that are getting arrested, you know, out of counter versus people here is one common one. People are curious about how many of them were just people who were drunk in public in a bad way, or how many people were you know, minors intoxicated, how many people though were actually like being disorderly, trying to figure. It was always like pulling teeth to get all of that data, and part of it is that the police just aren't necessarily tracking it in that way. Part of it is that, you know, there are complicated privacy issues in trying to figure out how to deal sometimes with some of those things, particularly if they're not tracking it in that way. You can't really ask for an aggregated number. You end up, they start being like, well, we can't give you all of our individual, you know, exactly what we did sort of things. And so I'm supportive. We need to figure out something, right? And maybe maybe contracts are an opportunity to do that. And I also think then I got reminded during the course of this conversation about, again, something that kind of ties back into our discussion on the contracts and things, but looking into the accountability of the approach that's being used. And so I've been hearing comments from people about seeing clumps of police officers going around without masks, even while arresting people. And I don't know whether to take it on face value or whether it's a second level rumor that's kind of described from. But it's the kind of thing where it's like I'd like to be able to have even on the Isla Vista Community Network meetings, we kind of have an opportunity where police come to that meeting and then we're able to ask questions about like, well, how about this, how about that, and then but maybe we can actually mandate that level of like, you will show up before us and answer our questions as a body, as the panel of people, who's trying to verify that the approach you've been using in our area has been appropriate in recent times, and they can maybe that's another thing that we can try to do here. But yeah, I don't know.
Thank you, Director Freeman. Yeah, I agree that I think we should get creative about how we use our tools to try and get better data, because ultimately, I don't think that any lasting change is going to be made if we're not able to all be operating off of the same facts. And so I don't know what the answer to that is. Maybe that is something that is in the future contractually obligated. But maybe for the time being, we sort of request that information from our partner law enforcement agencies and to see if it's even possible for them to break some of that out, as you mentioned. In this report, it seemed to say that it didn't seem like it was possible to break out the breakdown of the number of calls for service that were coming from Isla Vista due to the way that it was being reported. I know anecdotally, just there's publicly available information whenever a call is dispatched to fire or EMS, and I know because I've got the app which gives you an alert whenever it happens. Anecdotally, it's obviously been much lower in the last couple of months than it has been, writ large. And that's to say nothing about calls that are dispatched to just law enforcement as well, without any fire or EMS component, or say nothing about arrests that are made or citations that are given by officers that are in the field and maybe were not dispatched by a particular call for service. Which that approach has its own issues, and I think isn't always as productive as maybe some folks in law enforcement might think that it is. So I'd be curious to see what other members of the board think about that idea of trying to get more data sort of as part of this, because I think it's potentially a strong ask coming from our board, given that we do have the power and have contracts with public safety partners, so that we can try and get more information. Any other comments from the board? I'm assuming that's a yes in silence.
Definitely supportive.
Thank you, Director Bertrand. Okay, I'm gonna open up the public comment now. So any members of the public that would like to speak on public safety in general, give me a little wave or a comment. The first thing I see is from Julia, so I'm gonna go over to you.
Hi, thank you. I really appreciate this discussion, and most of the things that I was planning on saying anyways were discussed here, so I just want to express my support. I really want to say that I have been thinking that it's a really good idea to get really specific data from the police and understanding what arrests have been made, and so that we can understand not only how the can these be addressed better, but how can the roots of these problems be addressed better, which I think was said. So I think that's a really good idea. I also do agree that theft as a problem is not something that the absence of presence of police really changes, and that a lot of the times that theft is just reported and after the fact, and so that doesn't change the fact, as was stated. And also that that there are many ideas that we can put in place of the police as long-term things to be building up in the community, and And I do think that, I know we had discussed in other meetings or in this one about the idea of a neighborhood watch. And I really would like to be, continue to hear conversations about stuff like that are community-based ways of addressing problems. And I do think that a big thing, as Director Freeman did say, is that there are also some pretty big problems with neighborhood watches that have occurred in the past, especially with the death of Trayvon Martin. That was several years ago, which was from Neighborhood Watch. So there, of course, are some problems with that. And I think that whatever solutions that we come to, those, I think, as I have brought up before, those solutions also need to be very, constructed with in mind the needs of the community. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Julia, for your comments. Okay, I see a comment in the chat from Justin. Justin, do you have your mic on too? You want to speak?
Yeah, I can comment on that briefly if you'd like.
Go right ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I have all the data that you guys are asking for: arrest stats, self-initiated versus responding to calls for service, and everything else you guys talked about. You just need to ask me. I'm happy to provide it. I provide it to the multiple community members who come into my office and ask for it. So I'm happy to do that. And as far as responding to specific incidents that have occurred in Isla Vista, as you guys know, I attend all your meetings. I apologize, we had a baby, so I was on maternity leave for a couple weeks there, which is why I was gone. But other than that, I'm at every one of your meetings, so I'm happy to take any questions. So it's not like we're trying to hide anything here.
Thank you, Justin. And I don't think implication is that any hiding is going on, but I know that it can be burdensome sometimes to put together the stats administratively. So it's great to hear that you have them, and we'll have our staff follow up on that. I see a hand from Director Freeman, but I want to make sure there's no other public comments. Okay. I'll bring it back to the board, and I'll go over to Director Freeman.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I mean, I will say that there's turnover in various positions at the police department, of course, and so before Justin, we had I can picture him now. I'm a politician. I'm really bad at names, and it's just completely ridiculous, right? As a community resource deputy, and we've gone through various lieutenants, and so a lot of the experiences that I've had were in 2016, 2015, where we're really looking at I guess it was really 2015, 2014, we're really looking at the process of constructing this district and really trying to pummel on the aspects of data. I remember it being really complicated, and it's so to the extent to which that's changing or has changed, I am very excited. And so, you might now regret having been so happy to give us data as we start asking you for lots of data, but it's great.
Yeah, it definitely is a long, complicated process to formally request official data. However, I'm able to kind of go in and I have access to all the systems. It's just, yeah, like you say, if I do get very busy and I get a lot of requests, they go quickly, but I'll certainly do my best. And I do now. I haven't had a delay of over a week in getting data to anybody so far. So I guess if you start asking for mountains and mountains every single day, it might get tough, but for the most part, I think it'll be all right.
That's great to hear. Thanks, Justin. And like I said, we'll be sure to have our staff follow up, and very eager to be able to look at that. And so thanks for doing that. Are there any other board discussions? Okay, then with that, I'm not sure if we need a motion on this item. I think we've come to the agreement on the data and the agreement on moving forward with some of these individual projects, and they'll come to the board sort of as our staff and I sort of in the working group brings them together. So maybe it would be helpful to have some board direction to have our staff bring back some of these items in more official form. I don't know if anyone would want to make a motion to that extent. I would say a motion to direct staff to bring back or to research and bring back proposals to for our district's role to improve and augment things like the sobering center, and to identify our role in I guess I'm getting jumbled up with the words here. It's a long thing.
I guess I will move to direct staff to bring back a series of discussions on specific actionable plans that the board can consider separately in concert with the working group.
I think that's holistic and would be good. So there's a motion made by Freeman. Is there a second? Okay.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Director Hedges. All right.
And
Is there any?
Just a quick clarification question. Not all these discussions will have a plan all ready to go. Some might have, we need to discuss before saying we want to spend time developing a plan, right?
That makes sense. Okay. So the staff to bring back a series of specific agenda items for actionable topics that can lead to consideration.
Can I make a friendly proposed
please,
amendment?
Please.
Thank you. Yeah, so I like the direction that we're going with that, but maybe just to make sure that we're coming back with some actionable things, maybe we propose 2 right now, and the board will follow up once we get through those, and we can include that in the motion. But maybe if we want to ask that, and these are just examples, maybe you have other ideas for 2 first things, but ask for staff to come back with a report on Isla Vista utilization of sobering center services and data on the top public safety issues facing Isla Vista, and for the board to provide direction on additional items in the future.
I extra like that because that ties into Justin's offer to give us lots of data that he might soon regret. So let's take that up as soon as we can.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so we'll say that Bertrand made that motion, and
I'll second, or actually, then, well, I don't really care about you.
I don't care either.
if it's a new motion, I'll second it. But if not, Father John had seconded mine. I'm okay if Father John wants to second that. So
yeah, I double extra like the additions.
Yeah, great. So Freeman Hedges, I'll be a supporter of your new motion.
That works as well. Okay.
Okay, let me put the text up so we make sure we got it 100%. I think I got it.
All right. Is that friendly with the maker and the seconder?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. One thing I realized as I was speaking that motion, since we are going with something close to what I had, or at least the first half close to what I had, that it would be a lot less confusing if we move in concert with the working group from at the end of that phrase to after staff. So it's the motion to direct staff in concert with the working group to bring back a series of specific agenda items, as opposed to the board, which is made up of the working group in part. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. With that, I don't know if, is there any public comment on the motion? Okay, bring it back to the board. Any other discussion? All right, we'll go ahead and go to a roll call vote.
Great. Director Brent?
Yes.
Director Freeman?
Yes.
Director Bertrand?
Yes.
Director Hedges?
Yes.
Director Geis?
Yes.
Director Thurlow?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 with 1 absence. All right. Well, thanks everyone. We appreciate the robust discussion, and we look forward to this item coming back to us. Okay, we're going to move to item 4.3. This is a letter of opposition to new ICE policies on student visas. I brought this letter to the board at the end of last week because although we are not an educational institution, I think it's important that we stand up and be heard when members of our community are attacked by our government apparatus. And that really was what happened last week when ICE put out new guidelines that were wholly racist and xenophobic, targeting our international student community and threatening them with deportation. We cannot afford to stay silent when these horrible ideas are passed off as national security policy. It was really ridiculous to see an agency like ICE trying to insert itself into the conversation of when universities and colleges reopen and how they reopen. Those are decisions that should be left to our public health officials and those at the university within the shared governance system, not to the Department of Homeland Security. The good news is that earlier today, due to a lawsuit that was filed by Harvard and I believe some other universities as well, the Department of Homeland Security announced that they were dropping the rule and that they were not going to move forward with it. So we're happy to hear that. It sounds like there is still room for them to bring a revised rule back. However, the lawsuit is staying open, and it sounds like the judge did that intentionally, where if there is a new rule, then potentially the lawsuit could resume. So we're happy to see where things ended up, and I'm really it was definitely humbling to see many of our own students at UC Santa Barbara and Santa Barbara City College and members of our community speak up when this happened. Many international students themselves talking about the issues that this would cause them. So I don't know if it's necessary or appropriate to send the letter now, but I think whenever something like this happens, it's important for us to speak up. So with that, I'd open it up to the board, or if anyone has a motion.
Well, I would move that we table this. And just to make a quick comment, the University of California was among the lead plaintiffs against this. And I always want to make sure that when the University of California does something wrong, there's lots of people talking about it. But let's make sure we remember that the University of California was one of the first plaintiffs on this suit as well as on the DACA suit. Having made that little speech, I move that we table this letter for now.
Motion made by Director Thurlow.
I'll
Is there a
second. I'll second.
Seconded by Director Geis. Is there any other board discussion?
I'd like to just say one thing. I believe this definitely was another typical distraction, as much as it was an assault. But we have to be ready, and I'm encouraged that the university was ready, that the community was ready to respond, and to act against it. And I think to do much more than that at this point is what the orange one wants us to do.
Yeah, and I'll also say that I'm pleased and grateful for all the efforts of organizations and institutions like the university to oppose this. Spencer and Jonathan, thank you for bringing this forward. As the son of my father, who came to this country from Venezuela when he was in his early 20s on a student visa to go to NYU, I totally appreciate just how racist and destructive this proposed policy was. And I empathize for all of the students in our community who are here from other countries and who make our community a better place for making us a more diverse community. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Bertrand. Okay, I'm going to open up public comment. Any public comment on this item? Okay, I'll bring it back to the board, and we'll have the question called. And Jonathan, can you do roll call vote? I think you're muted.
Director Brandt?
Yeah.
Director Freeman?
Yes.
Director Bertrand?
Yes.
Director Hedges?
Yes.
Director Geis?
Yes.
Director Thurlow?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 with one absence. Okay, we're going to move on to item 4.4, which is the Community Responsibility Awareness and Outreach Campaign for the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to start off before we sort of get into the letter. This is an item that myself and Director Bertrand have worked with Jonathan on to bring forward to our board. But I just want to start off by talking a little bit about what I've seen in our community over the past couple of weeks, really starting since the weekend of July 4th. But I'm going to work backwards. So about 3 hours ago, I walked down Sabado and was walking back to my house after getting a cup of coffee, and saw across the street, a couple houses down from me, a group of about 20 people who were on a balcony having a party, not socially distanced, without wearing masks. And I think that aside from the fact that it's a Tuesday at 3 p.m., it's just incredibly inappropriate that activities like that are happening during a global pandemic. I am really, we've seen similar things that happened over the 4th of July weekend, especially where there were a number of really large social gatherings that were taking place. And I think it really punctuates that there needs to be some action taken here by our board and our district to try and better educate the public on what the public health order is. On one hand, I am sympathetic to the fact that I think for many people it was confusing that our economic sectors of society reopened, including sectors like retail and dining and breweries and bars. However, there was no revision of the mandate to only have gatherings of people in their own homes or of your own household. I can understand how that is confusing. at the same time, I think the guidance and messaging across our society for the importance of social distancing and the importance of containing the spread of this virus for the health and safety of our community, I think that is very clear, and it was disheartening to see some of the ways that some people in our community are taking liberties that I don't think are appropriate right now. I think the majority of people in Isla Vista, as always, are doing the right thing and taking painstaking efforts to do the right thing. But it's clear that there is a need here for us to intervene and do what we can to better educate and try and get people think about the consequences that their actions will have on others in our community, but also on our community as a whole. I think there's probably nothing more than the Isla Vistans on whole want than for some sort of return to the life that is a direct result of our academic institutions, whether it's Santa Barbara City College, UC Santa Barbara, or our Goleta Union School District, or the Santa Barbara Unified Schools. However, the more that the virus spreads, the less likely that will happen in any way, shape, or form. And so I think we need to do something to try and better educate people on that. So, Jonathan, I want to just hand it over to you if you want to talk a little bit, or Ethan as well, about sort of what's in this proposal, and or share any experiences that you've had over the past couple of weeks as well, just as Isla Vista residents.
Sure, I'll just briefly follow up, and I think that was a great introduction. Yesterday, myself, Spencer, and Jonathan met with a number of stakeholders at the county and the university to just really talk about what we can do differently to keep our community safe. And the number one thing, as Spencer alluded to, really is just improving community buy-in about the personal responsibility that all of us have for preventing the spread of COVID-19 in the community. We saw a high level of compliance early on in the pandemic. People were practicing physical distancing and taking health precautions. But as time has gone on and the reopening process has begun, although we're seeing some backtracking right now, people have seemed to get a little bit looser in their compliance with health precautions. Now, our community is not unique in this. I think quarantine fatigue is happening in many places, and it's understandable. But our community does have unique risks in that we have a lot of young people that maybe feel a little bit invincible. And for many young people, if they contract COVID-19, they may have little to no symptoms. But they're capable of spreading it to other young people who will have serious symptoms and health complications. They're capable of spreading it to our community. And we don't really have the best way to understand the spread because people in Isla Vista are not really getting tested. So between not knowing how prevalent it is in our community to seeing the very real possibility of it spreading because people are socially interacting so much, that's really where the concern comes from. So I think we want to work to kind of educate Isla Vista residents on how they can better practice physical distancing and health precautions while still being connected with each other and still being social in a safe way. I think number two, we want to work with Isla Vista businesses to ensure that they're doing everything they can to create a safe environment, which we've seen a lot of awesome efforts by the businesses to do that. We've also seen some scary situations where there was little regard for health guidelines. And then also one thing I'll add is I think we want to work with our property providers just to make sure that they are doing what they can to protect the health of the folks who live in their buildings, especially with the dense housing that we have in Isla Vista. So that's kind of an introduction. I think right now we are working to see how exactly we can contribute to this effort. I think ideally we would have a Isla Vista ambassador type program where community members, volunteers, and other stakeholders are working to outreach with our community and kind of be the on the ground messengers for keeping safe and doing that outreach in a safe and socially distant way. But I think right now we just have to figure out what our role is in that and how we can best help coordinate or support the efforts. So I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Yeah, there isn't a lot more left to be said. It is, I think there is a lot of progress that Isla Vista can make in terms of following the right behavior guidelines that keep everybody safe. And so it's important for us to play our role in that. Spencer and I did talk to Ross earlier today before the meeting to review the proposal and see how it fits into what we can do, and we do need to work on it more in terms of how it can be accomplished under our powers that we're given under the law. But it is something that I think we have a lot of partners ready to work with us. Around 4th of July, it did seem that Isla Vista was refilling a rapid pace. It does feel a lot more full right now, and it did seem like as it also was getting full, the behaviors were breaking down a little bit, and we went from 1 case to 28 in a month almost. So there's a lot to do. I think we still need to figure out how, but I think we know what we need to accomplish, which is helping give better advice on a peer-to-peer basis on how to behave the best way to keep everyone safe and get this done with. We can only get it done if everyone is on board.
Can I ask a question, George?
Go ahead, George.
I mean, I don't want to jump out of line here. You ready for the board to jump in?
Oh, yeah, I think that was a great synopsis by Ethan and Jonathan. So now we can get back to the discussion.
Just a quick question, Spencer. Is this the item that I asked to be put on the agenda?
Yes.
No, I think. Oh, okay.
Yes.
So you had 2
Yes or
items
no?
I think that we had asked. Yeah.
What's that?
Yes.
This is? Okay. Well, I forwarded 2 pieces of material that I would have liked to have added to the board packet. The first was a picture of a party, and which is pretty dramatic, showing why we have a problem. And second of all was a message from the governor's office about how to do a some ideas about a COVID-19 messaging campaign. I just want to add that the university is ready and willing right now to help the CSD put together a messaging campaign to try to convince our residents that they are at huge risk to themselves as well as to the rest of the community. And in putting that campaign together, there's, I believe, a lot of value in terms of expertise as well as potential materials. So I would just put that forward as that was the point of me asking that this be put on the agenda, which is the university is ready to contribute to helping the community understand that they all need to be wearing masks, period. That's sort of the bottom line. So I would hope the CSD takes up the university. Again, here's a situation where the university wants to help. It's in the university's interest, after all, to keep every single one of its students healthy and safe. And since a lot of what we've been talking about tonight is health and safety, I can't think of a more desperately pressing issue. I'm really fearful that Isla Vista is going to turn into a hotspot, and we're not going to have any place to put these kids. So, end of speech.
Well, thank you, George. And I think that's great to hear. Just so you know, we're in full coordination with university, and we had university folks that are meeting with county stakeholders as well. And so we're definitely all working together to try and figure out what the right message is and how do we best get it out in a way that is going to land and get us the result that we all want.
I would just add this. We got to, I don't mean to be wanky or hyperbole. I really think we got to do something relatively quickly here. I think that the situation, again, by the photographs, by what you're saying is, I mean, it's only, we don't have a whole lot of time to get this thing going before it's going to be too late. So I would just urge us to not do a lot of meetings and instead do a lot of action. Thanks.
I absolutely agree with you, George. And I think that was the spirit of our meeting yesterday. And I'm glad that council is looking at just what we are allowed to do in a safe manner. I think that that's a good review, but we do need it to be done quickly, and we can adjust kind of this preliminary idea that we have of a campaign to whatever concerns there may be. I mean, at a minimum, it's aggressive information sharing, and I think that we just need to figure out the way that we can do that, and the way that we can bring in other partners and community members to help in this message. But time is definitely of the essence. And I think in addition to the work of the district staff to get this proposal together right away, all of us as representatives of the district and our colleagues at the Recreation and Park District and other community leaders all need to be just seeing what we can do as leaders in the community to get out this message while we're getting together this wider campaign. I know all of us have different connections in the community, and we need to be using those to the fullest extent we can, just to promote community wellness and this urgent message for safety. Also, any of us who are observing concerns in the community, whether it's a large party, whether it is a business that's really crowded or something else, be sure that you're taking note of that. And there's a community complaint form that the county has on its website that we can use. Additionally, if it's an emergency, we can report it directly to the relevant authorities. But all of this is to say that all of us, I think, have a shared responsibility in doing everything we can to take quick action on an organizational level, but also from anything we're hearing and seeing on the streets.
Thank you, Director Bertrand. I'm going to go to Director Geis.
Yeah, I just wondered, has anybody talked about doing, random community testing on a consistent basis throughout the community of Isla Vista? Like, 50 tests a week that are randomly put out to the community, and we do it for, the length of this virus to try and, identify whether, COVID is in the community and people are spreading it. It just seems we hear across the country, there's a lack of testing. And I was talking to Jonathan, and says, oh, yeah, IV's doing really good. They got one test. And they go, yeah, well, they've only done one test. And so it just seems like the Isla Vista population is not a population we're testing because the COVID's not there yet. And it seems like we should get ahead of that. And it's the same question. I know we have the homeless population out there, and I thought that they were going to do some testing of the homeless population, but I don't think that's showing up in any numbers or they've done any testing. So,
Bob, can I respond? Spencer?
Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I will tell you this, what is going on. I mean, first of all, correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, but the last number I heard was there's 26 active cases in Isla Vista. There was one for weeks and weeks and weeks, and now we're at 26.
It's not 26 active, it's 26 cases. I think active is like 4 or 5. That's people who are like identified who had it and are recovering. But that doesn't account for people who have it but haven't been tested.
So didn't the 26 mean that there was 26 positive results?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean active. Active means they
Okay.
currently
Okay.
have. So actually
Okay.
right now, according to July 14th, county health website, it says 0 active cases in Isla Vista, but obviously there's some. It's just 0.
Yeah. Okay. So what I was going to tell you, Bob, is UCSB's nanoscience program has developed a process in which test results are almost instantaneous. They're doing, in order to support their application to the FDA for this process, they're doing testing on the campus, including students and staff and faculty. And as I understand, there's a relatively large number of tests being done, but they aren't releasing the results. Other than their first round, they turned up 5 positives in just the first round. So, and now there's some concern about, because of blah blah and research science and HIPAA and everything else, that there's concerns about it. But they are doing testing, and at some point we should know, is it pretty widespread on the campus itself?
Well, I think that's just like the issue we had with law enforcement. We got these tests out there and we can't get to the damn results.
Yeah.
You know, and so I just think that if you really want to go, you know, send a message to the people out in Isla Vista, we should start testing them and then giving them the results and showing the vulnerability of that community. Because I believe that 28 tests on the county's website are 28 tests. It doesn't mean that they were positive tests. No, they could have been positive because that's
not true.
No, that confirmed.
That's not how it works. So
those are those 28 are confirmed
is the number
tests.
of confirmed cases. I know that they performed more than 28 tests in Isla Vista because I was tested a number of weeks ago and I was negative, so I did not show up in that number.
Oh,
as just one example. That doesn't mean that there's not much more prevalence of this in our community, given that most of the leading research has shown that so many people are walking around spreading the disease and they're asymptomatic without symptoms. I believe that it's over 50% of the current instances where COVID has been transmitted in our county. It's been through community spread. And so that's, a pretty large number of people. I'm going to go over to Father John because I see you have something to say.
One thing we must remember in this is that the whole bloody epidemic began with one person. It began with one person. And this is a virulent enemy. And it's not going to magically go away if we just sprinkle pixie dust on it. And even randomly testing everybody is not necessarily going to make that case. What ought to make the case is the fact of what's being seen in the numbers nationwide. And second of all, that which is already in the consciousness, at least hopefully, of all students and all of our community members, that what we do upstream has consequences downstream. We don't throw trash into the urban creeks because it goes down to the ocean that connects to us all. And somehow or another, we have to see that what we do in our backyard, on our beach, has consequences in the lives of everybody around it. Our parents, our grandparents, our children, our grandchildren. We're going to have to shut down services next week at our church. We had, of all places, we were complying religiously with everything. We were doing what we were told. We were distancing and keeping the access down and everything. And now all of a sudden, because of spikes in cases, because of lack of vigilance in the whole community, we're having to shut our life down again. You know, we'll do that. You know, it's a sacrifice we'll make. But we have to see this as war, and the whole community's in it, whether we want to get out and party again or not. Anyway, I just believe it's education as much as it's testing. It's also a care for your neighbor. It's ecology, bluntly speaking.
Thank you, Father John. I think that really caps everything. I'll go over to Director Friedman briefly, and then I want to bring us back to recommendations.
Yeah. So the one thing is the extent to which anyone is looking into pooled testing, I would find very fascinating. But I'm sure that it's really exciting to hear the UCSB nano biology is looking into this, and actually has got like apparently state-of-the-art testing. That is amazing to hear that we're doing this locally. I love UCSB. One thing is I want to say also is continue with something that George had said is that the idea that UCSB is excited to help with the messaging campaign is amazing. It's something that I mean, UCSB is generally pretty good about having every now and then I think that they make a tactical error, but it's rare. I actually think by and large, I think the UCSB's messaging on a lot of topics is something that is very, very professional and very useful. And so the idea that they're interested in and partnering with us on this and actually really providing that expertise in order to try to make this work, I think is something we should really jump on as soon as we can. This ties, I think, into some of the things that I've been saying for a while. This is the idea that in order to really try to make inroads with a complicated educational process, you need to be deeply essentially integrated, embedded in a lot of the conversations that are going on. That's the kind of thing that hopefully, if we're getting when the budget discussions, if we are in fact budgeted to have something akin to a community manager, that is the kind of issue that I think is something where you have people constantly watching on all of these different Facebook groups and the subreddit, and are trying to essentially build credibility among certain community manager identities in order to allow them to guide conversations and be able to really educate the community in this way. And so when we come up to something like this, it's not like a one-off messaging campaign, but it's more of a continual and ongoing conversation. And so hopefully, if we'll be able to actually do this, when we actually get that position. But in the meantime, so this is such an important thing, as Father John has said, this is war. We need to figure out how to whatever we can do really quickly on this. One thing though that I'm a little bit concerned by is, so it's got here, perform proactive outreach via door-to-door methods to educate residents regarding safe social gatherings. And I'm curious, as part of the ambassador program framework, and I'm curious to know who we're anticipating doing that. Is the idea that we're trying to recruit volunteers to go door to door as part of this ambassador program? Is that something we're assigning our staff to go door to door as part of this ambassador program? I'm just a little bit concerned, partly because it's like the roaming viral vector that's going around talking to people at their various doors. I think that it's something that the people that they interact with, they can be wearing a bunch of protective gear, but the people that they're interacting with are probably almost never going to be, if they answer the door, talking to the person. I'd be concerned about them getting covered essentially during some kind of conversation in viral spray. I think that we should really try to do everything that we can with relation to online messaging and online education, and do this remotely before we fall back to trying to do some kind of door-to-door campaign in that sense.
I'll jump in just to stop you there, just because I think it was mentioned by Jonathan and earlier in the discussion that this framework is not a final framework, and I think the recommendation is to have staff work together to bring something back with us in concert with legal counsel as well. Because we
Great.
I'm
not saying I'm against the whole thing. I was just commenting on that one sentence there in order to attempt to provide that kind of feedback for staff, for other board members in order to have this conversation. So don't take it as me being like the person who's like, I hate that one sentence, therefore scrap it. And then one
throwing
final
it
thing,
out there, because and maybe this I think would be a good thing just for everyone to know, is that the RISE framework that the county has is based around the idea that when there are social and physical distancing non-compliance or non-compliance happening with the public health officer's order, that people in the community have been calling, this phone number to report those instances, and that it is not wholly appropriate to have a law enforcement response to try and remedy the situation, but rather that community volunteers can respond and try and provide education. So it started out of the impetus to try and do better outreach to businesses. And now here in Isla Vista, we're sort of going to meld it also with this residential component. And what exactly that looks like, it's a little bit of a moving target right now. But your comments are well taken.
And then one final thought that I wanted to add is that I think that there's interesting opportunities to try to figure out, in the same sense we look at other social problems and we look at the things that we're doing to try to address them, and then we ask the question of both what are the things that we can't control and how can we mitigate those impacts, and as well as we look at the things that what are the root cause that we can attempt to address and before something actually becomes a problem. To some extent, what we're looking at here is and it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse the longer this goes on. Is rampant loneliness, and trying to figure out how to deal with that in the scope of what we're doing here, I think is going to be very important, because that leads to people wanting to be like, you know what, I don't even care if I die. I just need this. And so whether that be on the one side of trying to figure out how to, and the messaging on this would just be so complicated. I appreciate, but I think it's worth thinking about as we go into these sorts of things. If you must do this, here are the things that you need to be doing to be safe. And on the other side of it, figuring out how we can, in the same way that when we're looking at, for example, rowdy, drunken, underage drinking parties in the area, trying to figure out what are the alternatives that we can provide. Maybe there's something that we can try to proactively figure out in order to help people feel more connected with those around them, or help people with those loneliness issues, like a mental health education outreach. I don't mean for people who are, individual targeting people who are like, heavily depressed. I mean like a community-wide trying to figure out how to support a increasingly frustrated group of people. I mean, I'm the kind of person who I could probably sit around alone in my apartment for years and I'd be fine. But I know people who within like a week were really, really struggling and were becoming very depressed, and it was very, very hard. And so figuring out what we can do, whether it be even things like running our own little like online social coffee salons where it's like everyone could join a video chat at certain periods of time in order to try to like talk about various interesting topics or something, just some outlet that allows people to maybe feel connected. But
Spencer, are you ready for a motion?
Yeah, so if you look at the report, there's a recommended action, and that's to direct staff to work with other service providers to establish and coordinate an outreach and education campaign to help prevent the spread of COVID-19.
I'll make that motion.
Okay.
I'll make that motion. Yeah, and Jay, I totally agree. Going door to door is not something we can do. In terms of the mental health issue, the entire society is suffering right now. I mean, the entire society is suffering from these issues. And I think what we need to do is focus in first on trying to educate our young people. And I really hate to say this, but the fact is, until one of our constituents dies from COVID-19, this is not going to have an impact. And then once we lose our first constituent, all hell is going to break loose. So I hope that we can do this before that situation occurs. And again, my motion, it reflects on the recommendation from the staff.
Okay,
I will second that
there's been
motion.
a motion made and second by Freeman. So now I'm going to open up public comment. Are there any public comments on this item? Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the board. Is there any other board discussion? Okay, I think this has been a robust discussion, and I think that has been good. And the only other thing I would say is, I know it's been mentioned a couple times that we want to move quickly on this. So would members of the board be okay if we had to have a special meeting to approve recommendations? Okay,
Yes.
I'm seeing nods, I'm seeing approval.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, then we'll call the question, and Jonathan, can you call the roll?
Yes. Getting it up. So Director Brett,
Yes.
Director Freeman,
Yes.
Director Bertrand,
Yes.
Director Hedges,
Yes.
Director Geis,
Yes.
Director Thurlow.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 with 1 absence. Okay, thanks everyone for that discussion. We're going to move to item 4.5, which is the discussion on district partnerships for homeless support services. So I wanted to talk briefly about some of the work that has come out of the Isla Vista Homelessness Task Force, which Jonathan and I participate in, as well as a number of other organizations, including the Park District, UC Santa Barbara. George participates as well as other groups, community organizations such as Food Not Bombs. One of the things that we'd put together, a big credit to United Way and Emily Allen for putting this together, was a sort of miniature point in time count for Isla Vista. So annually, there's a point in time count to try and ascertain the number of homeless individuals in our community. And given the pandemic and the way that has affected homelessness and homeless encampments in our community, we thought it necessary to have an additional point in time count. And so some people on this call may have participated. I know Jonathan and I did, and that was a great opportunity where we got to go out and survey our houseless individuals in our community about how we could better serve them. We also got some data back on numbers in terms of how many houseless community members we have and how many encampments we have. And what the data showed is that we are at a similar place to where we were at the beginning of this year in terms of the number of individuals. But I think that because of the new rules regarding encampments that are meant to control the spread of COVID-19, we have seen increased attention by some in our community to the homeless encampments that exist. And so one of the things that sort of come out of that survey is that Jonathan and I and representatives from other organizations, including the Park District, are going to tour the encampments with representatives from the organization Quick Response, which is a organization that was involved in the cleanup of the Lompoc Creek bed about I guess that was over a year ago at this point, to try and see if there's a way that we can provide cleaning services to some of these encampments to better improve some of the health and safety conditions that are there. So in addition to that, we are also working, or representatives from the group are working to provide storage solutions to homeless folks in our community. That was a big thing that the survey data showed, is that many would be able to be more tidy with their belongings, but they did not have any place to store them except for where they had them, at their encampment. And so that's something that's going to be instituted as well. I really wanted to put this on the agenda for us to have a discussion. And in addition, because one of the things that came out of our last meeting was a request from Director Thurlow, that we do more as a district, and I think that is important. We've had a great partnership so far with United Way in expanding the coordinated entry hours and providing meals out of the community center. But I think that there's always room for us to do more. So we want to put this on the agenda at his request. And Director Thurlow, I don't know if there's anything that you would add to that in addition.
No, I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Thurlow. I see a hand from Director Geis.
Hey, Spence, you said that you did another point in time count, but you didn't say how many. And you said it was comparable to the beginning of the year. And, I've got various things. I don't know if that was the 17 number or the 70 number. Is it 17 or 70? Or
I don't have the numbers in front of me. So I'm looking to see if I can find a copy of that. Jonathan, I don't know.
I do have it. I do have it. What they said, and I'm sorry I didn't actually attach this. I had actually meant to attach this, and it completely lapsed in my mind. So I'll attach it now, so everyone can see it. But the total is 44. 27 not in a vehicle and 17 in vehicles.
And one thing that was mentioned is that the comparableness is when it comes to encampments. In terms of overall numbers, it is lower, but we think that may be because part of the instructions were that we focus in on encamped individuals rather than people who are sleeping in their vehicles. Additionally, I'm sure many of you participated in the homeless or the point in time count before. It's much easier to find people who are encamped in cars when it's the early morning hours than it is once the sun has come up. And we did do the survey when the sun was up so that we could better interact with people as well. So I guess we can sort of have a discussion. I don't know if anyone has anything that they'd like to discuss on how we could better serve our homeless neighbors. Well, I'll just get started and say, or ask for staff, is there anything that we can do additionally? I know we've taken action to purchase the food. Can you give us an update on where that's at and if there's any additional needs there?
They're serving the food. It's made by the co-op. $3 a meal. So, we
That's
don't
great
agree,
to hear.
we just cut a check.
That is great to hear. And no additional funding needs on that end?
Not that I've been made aware of, but it's also only been 2 weeks with the new system.
Okay. I'll go over to Director Geis.
are we serving daily meals? Or are we still on the are we taking care of 2 days a week? And is it breakfast, lunch, and dinner? And is
Yeah.
it, or all, yeah, up to what?
We're taking care of 2 days a week for lunch.
Oh, okay.
And there's, some people get non-perishable stuff so that they can eat it when we're not providing stuff.
And then who's picking up the rest of the cost and the other meals?
I don't think there are that many other meals right now because a lot of funding did dry up. So we're, now a funder where other funders were not there before or aren't here anymore. So on Monday, Showers of Blessing provides a meal. Food Not Bombs has been doing a lot of work. I think they expanded. Ash is on the call who represents or works with them, but I think they expanded back to Sunday. So they're still doing the dinners. The youth center, the St. George Youth Center, was doing a meal on Tuesdays, 10 to 12, and they've run out of funding for that. And they had talked to me about maybe getting funding from us, but we never concluded that discussion. And I think Saturday is also another day where there might not be anything happening, but there could be other efforts, but not from the official providers. And I haven't checked. Again, a lot of things changed at the end of June when funding ran out. So still need to figure out what's still being funded and what's not.
And is the county involved at all?
The county used to be one of the funders for some of the food, and the food bank was supporting too.
And did the county just walk away?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I think Ethan could maybe help me answer this, but I think what happened was that the funding that was there for that stuff is no longer available.
Are you speaking specifically to food assistance?
Yeah.
I can look into that.
Yeah, that's what I understood, because there were funded meals from a lot of these agencies, and they were getting help from the food bank and the county, but a lot of that assistance had run out, and that's why they started turning to us.
In our, I don't know, maybe Ethan would know this. Are the homeless population eligible for, SNAP program and stuff from county social services?
Generally, yes. Many of them do receive that assistance. But just to go back, I want to differentiate between the food bank and the county, because Jonathan, I know that the food bank was originally helping, but I think that might have been separate from the county.
Okay.
Maybe coordinated by the county, but not funded.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
Cool. What I'll say is, in addition to, these efforts, which I really believe in walking around the parks in particular and seeing the scale of the encampments, my concern is just if those people are being reached right now by outreach. Like, I'm sure many of them go to the homeless support site and get food and other assistance, which is really great. But I'm concerned about what the living conditions are like in the parks. And I just don't know what the level of outreach to those folks is right now. If there's anything that we can do to support expanded outreach specifically to the encampments, I'm definitely happy to support that, whatever we can do as far as just increasing that presence out there and helping people who are living in the encampments.
Yeah, so just to respond to that, one actual specific issue, there's a lot obviously, but one specific piece of outreach that has ended now is Doctors Without Walls. So their board made a decision to stop coming out to Isla Vista like they had originally, 2 months ago, only decided to come out regularly. So there's no medical outreach that's proactive right now, and we need to figure that out of who's able to provide that. That was one of the things we talked about on Friday. And I do know that AmeriCorps still does coordinated entry and outreach during the Wednesday, Friday, when they usually would. Some of their folks are at the service center, and some of their folks go out into the park, mainly in Escoyo, to outreach to people, but not to the other locations where there's more encampments, like Sueño Orchards.
Yeah, and my thought on that is just as far as what we're allowed to do in terms of outreach is, if the park district wanted to partner together on just increasing the Isla Vista specific outreach, I would be interested in exploring what we could do under our power to operate and maintain community facilities and public spaces, because those are public spaces and people need help in them. It it would require partnership between our districts, but if the will is there from the Park District to step up this Isla Vista response, I would be happy to support it.
That's a good specific ask we can take to them.
Ethan, I think that you raise a great point. When I was out there during the point in time count, there's actually a specific question about whether or not individuals had case manager, and I'm looking right now to see. Oh, okay. So of the people, at least just anecdotally, I know that the majority that we talked to said no, and so there always is more outreach that we can do. Of those that were named, well, one person named Father John, actually, so just a nice little shout out to you. But some others included AmeriCorps, New Beginnings, Public Health, and so I think it would be a good idea for us to explore, seeing as that, like I said, there's always more outreach that we can do, and maybe to see, as far as the medical outreach goes, if there's room for some sort of partnership with UCSB Student Health, or if there are student organizations that are doing medical outreach. I think that that's been the case in the past, and I'm definitely curious to hear if we know if that's happening currently too. So I see Father John's hand, so I'll go over to him.
The connection to UCSB, I think, would be a good one to begin again with. Back in 2003, 2002, or 2003, it was volunteers from Student Health Outreach from UCSB, from the Community Affairs Board folks, student volunteers. Those were the folks who populated my volunteer support at St. Bridget Fellowship when the church was at the top of the loop there. And out of that is actually what Doctors Without Walls grew out of. Our dinners there were the first place that Doctors Without Walls came before they started doing stuff downtown. Dr. Mimi Duhan and Dr. Bill Morton Smith from Direct Relief and others really began that work there. I think it's time that I poked my nose in this again. And I kind of got off of it to a certain extent in 2012 when I went to work for the county and became very mental health targeted, specific, bureaucratic. And now that I'm in a different station in life, I think if we're going to stay here in Isla Vista, that's something I need to poke my nose in again. So I'd be happy to be a part of future conversations on this.
Thank you.
That would be great. Thank you for that, Father John. So as far as a motion goes, I'm thinking maybe a motion to direct staff to explore partnerships in order to increase outreach services for our homeless neighbors would be good. I know I'm getting in the habit of saying what I think would be a good motion, but if anyone else would like to make the motion,
I'll move for us to direct staff to work with the Park District to determine or develop a potential partnership for conducting outreach to homeless encampments and public spaces in Isla Vista.
I will second that motion.
Thank you, Director Freeman. And Jonathan, if you have better language for that, feel free to let us know. And I'll be clear, my intention is for us, if this is the direction the Park District wants to go, to contract with an experienced service provider to do this, whether that's United Way, whether that's Doctors Without Walls in a different capacity than they've previously served Isla Vista, But the intention is not for district staff or volunteers to do this outreach. It's to contract with professionals, should that be the direction the park district wants to go.
Got it. I think the language is perfect.
Okay,
Can
there's
I-
been a motion made by Bertrand, seconded by Freeman, and I'll go over to Director Thurlow.
Yeah, real quick. Why would we assume that this is something that we would pay for as opposed to the county pay for?
I mean, if I think that's a request you can make of the county, but what I will say is, from what I see in the many communities across Santa Barbara County, we're all struggling with homelessness, and there's a level of service that's provided by the county, but also each individual community needs to step up to really make a difference on the ground. As I've shared before, until recently on the weekends, I was working at one of the county's emergency shelters that we've established. And there, some of the clients that I was taking care of were housed from the parks of Isla Vista. So that's something that's been a central part of the county's response, getting people temporary housing and doing outreach. But what I'm seeing across the county in many different communities, from Santa Barbara and Goleta up to Santa Maria, it really does take these supplemental local efforts to make a difference.
I'm concerned that I might have misheard the motion that I seconded. So can I hear it back?
Yeah, it's motion to direct staff to work with the IVRPD to develop a partnership to conduct outreach to homelessness encampments in public spaces in Isla Vista.
Okay, I just wanted to verify that, because I appreciate that there are costs associated with that, but I figure that in outreach it's not as much as, it's not like us putting money directly into the problem solution. So it was just suddenly I just got confused as to whether the motion was very different than I thought. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be clear that I do think that this could require additional resources. I mean, it's possible that, from my impression, I think the service providers are doing as much with existing resources as possible. And for us to get a higher level of service in Isla Vista, there will need to be additional resources brought to the table. But I mean, that's just my assumption. But I mean, like I said, this really needs to be done by the professionals, and this isn't something that we can cut corners on.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I'm against that. I was just wanting to make certain that the motion that I seconded, because the motion doesn't say that we're going to pay for something yet. We are going to direct staff to, and so then I imagine in order to actually, if any substantial expense were to happen, it would have to come back to us and we get to decide on. But
cool, thank you.
And I'm sorry, I've been blocking Father John with my motion discussion. So
that's okay. I'm gonna go over to Father John now.
If this would be friendly to the makers, the most successful outcomes have not just been outreach, but they've also been efforts that had a component of drop-in. In other words, a fixed place that people could come get mail and so forth and so forth. When St. Bridget's had its work there, what really made it as effective as it was for the season that we did, for the years that we did it, was that we had a place where folks could come pick up their mail, where folks could come pick up, make an appointment and meet someone there. Much more effective than just working out of a briefcase. It also encourages continuity. Are we prepared to go that far, I guess is what I'm asking. And if so, I'd like to see that be a part of the motion.
Yeah, so we have, and Jonathan can speak more to this, but right now we have the Wednesday through Friday drop-in, and perhaps we can help make sure that that's adequate and look for how we can supplement those efforts.
Yeah, I think just looking at the motion, I think that we'd probably want to talk with our service providers and see if that's something that they feel it would be appropriate and necessary. But I think it's covered within the motion, just outreach in general.
Good.
I'm going to go over to Director Freeman.
I really like those ideas, and I think they tie well into the idea of having a community center. I mean, if you think, I mean, a community center is the kind of place where you want to have an appointment for somebody or whatever. You can go meet them there if you want to. And the idea of being able to have things delivered there in certain circumstances, I think that it just kind of fits with the service that we're supposedly providing by having the community center in the first place. So, figuring out how to actually make it happen, cool.
Great. I'll close before I open public comment by just saying that in my experience participating in the point in time count, I was really impressed with the outreach worker that I was paired up with from behavioral wellness, and just have a really strong appreciation for the work that those folks do to try and connect our most vulnerable folks in our community to services, and really do think that this will have a good and positive impact on all of that. So
good.
I'll open up public comment if there's any comment on the motion. Okay, I'll bring it back to the board, and I think we've closed discussion. So with that, we'll call the question. Jonathan, can you do a roll call?
Yep. Director Brandt?
Yes.
Director Freeman?
Yes.
Director Bertrand?
Yes.
Director Hedges?
Yes.
Director Guys?
Is that me?
Yeah.
No.
Director Fairwell?
Yes.
All right, motion passes 5-1 with 1 absence. Okay, we will go to item 4.6, the district COVID-19 response. Jonathan, I know we've asked to have this item on our agenda just for the foreseeable future. Is there anything that you have for us under this item that we haven't already covered?
No, I'll just mention that we actually have had an uptick in mediations coming in and having way more success getting people to mediate than ever before. So that means 3 done, which is more than ever before. So there's a mediation request coming in, but they're not seemingly necessarily that related to COVID issues. So 1 was.
That's great news to hear that there's an uptick. I know this is the season when tenants who have moved out should be receiving their deposits back. So I'm happy to hear that that's borne out in the data, and looking forward. I don't know. I guess the only question I would ask is there anything we can do, or I guess in addition to what we're already doing to promote that program, given the timing?
I think, yeah, we'll do some other, we'll push more on social media, but I don't think there's anything more to do right now.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll close item 4.6, and we will go to item 4.7, the Sustainable Transportation Equity Project Grant. So I'll go over to Jonathan to sort of introduce this item.
Hey, so today, we're not asking for approval of the grant or approving us applying for this grant at all. And I know there's some attachments that provide some information and like a draft of how we could start filling it out, but all of that is very early draft and filling it out just to give some early structure. Like one example is we've already talked about changing who the sub-applicants are. But this grant came about, or we discovered this grant over the last month and a half, where there were different grants coming our way funded by cap and trade money at the state level. And we weren't able to get a few of them or even apply to some of them. But this grant became apparent as one that actually the state recommended it to me when I was getting technical assistance for another one, shared it with the county sustainability division, who also felt that this was a grant that Isla Vista would be very competitive for. And so, and it relates to some of the other work of grants we've supported, like the Alternative Transportation Program grant that had a public session survey last week. So, and it all, again, another thing it relates to is me and President Brandon, Director Geis, we've been meeting with our supervisor, Joan Hartman, and one of the things that came out of those discussions and actually made it into the budget is funding to start looking at community plan and how do we better plan for the future of Isla Vista. So all those things actually made it a great situation for us to apply to this. And our preliminary analysis, like I said, shows that we could actually have a good chance of winning a large amount of money to develop a clean mobility plan for Isla Vista. And so I know that's not as very clear and spelled out in the concept review, because we've moved on a little bit from that. That was an early draft. We're working on improving it from there on the meetings we've already had. But that's the kind of the idea behind applying for this grant, is developing a clean mobility plan for Isla Vista. And all the players thought that it would be most strategic for the community services district to be the lead applicant, because that would help increase our chances of winning the grant, but we wouldn't be alone in doing it. So we would be putting our names as the lead applicant, but with heavy support from the county and different groups within UC Santa Barbara. So this is more for us to we'd be taking responsibility and lead, but it wouldn't be all of the work on our staff and our district on it. So we're not applying yet. This is more to inform the board and to get direction on continuing to work on this, and then later in the summer into September, we come back with what the application is to get the board sign off on applying.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Jonathan. I think that this is a very important item, and is definitely in line with a lot of the discussions that we had during our budget process about how can we better envision sustainable transportation within Isla Vista, and what are the different tools that we have at our disposal to do that from an infrastructure and planning perspective. So I'm very supportive of this, and very glad to hear the discussions that have taken place so far, and look forward to see what comes from it. Is there any other board feedback?
Yes, I am really excited by this. I think Director Freeman and I have discussed some of these issues before, particularly in regard to a potential way to increase car share in Isla Vista and potentially electric vehicle car share in Isla Vista, and other ideas for how we can have a cleaner transportation system that relies less on individual vehicle ownership in Isla Vista. Just one example of part of what this could address. And I've looked at these grants before, and in the past, I ran into, and this is more on the implementation side, that the funding is often only for communities that are identified by the state as being disadvantaged in terms of environmental impacts, and Isla Vista doesn't meet that criteria. But for the planning and capacity grant, we do meet the criteria for being low income. So I am really grateful that we've identified the planning and capacity grant as something that we can apply for. Just to confirm, Jonathan, that I'm understanding this correctly, the proposal that's attached today, that's just kind of one option of where we could go and what we can consider as far as applying for this grant, right?
Yeah, and like I said, we're not. This option's already drifting away from being the main one, and there's better options already. We had our first more coordinated meeting yesterday, and we're getting technical assistance from the state tomorrow on it, and so they'll help us suss out what we can best apply for.
Cool. Well, this is so exciting. I have a smile on my face, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Director Bertrand. Is there any other board feedback? Okay, then with that, we'd entertain a motion to direct staff to move forward with this.
I'll move to direct. Oh, go ahead.
No, that was me causing feedback on the line. I'm sorry.
No problem. I'll move to direct staff to begin applying for a sustainable transportation equity project grant and to report back to the board on the application.
And I will second that motion.
All right, we have a motion made by Bertrand, seconded by Freeman. Is there any public comment? Any further board discussion? Okay, we will go to a roll call vote.
Director Brandt,
Yes.
Director Freeman,
Yes.
Dr. Bertrand,
Yes.
Dr. Hedges,
Yes.
Dr. Geis,
Yes.
Dr. Thurlow.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0, 1 absence. All right, we'll move to item 4.8, the professional services agreement for the rental housing mediation program, and I'll hand it over to Jonathan.
Great. Well, Deborah did 99% of the work on this. I just finished it up while she was on vacation last week and just drafting this contract with Sayer McNeil, who, as you all might remember from 2 years ago, and it's crazy to say it was 2 years ago, but he was the first mediator who came onto the program with the Legal Aid Foundation when they were administering it. He did have family issues come up that made him no longer able to be in the role, but as we had a bigger need for more mediators, he came back on our radar and is just as invested as he was 2 years ago, if not more now, in building and helping us build the program. And now we have Deborah's expertise and time and focus on it as well. So this is just the standard contract we've had before, but now with Sayer in it and slightly updated scope of work that also we're going to be amending. So we wanted to get this approved now just so we can have Sayer on board to handle mediations. And he's actually been kind enough to handle one on Friday that was had to happen Friday, and he wasn't on contract yet. But we do need him on board to help us get through mediations. But Deborah has a lot of ideas on updating the scope more, and so we'd like to, and having other mediators who maybe do different parts of the scope, because we don't want to mingle someone giving advice to someone who's going to do the mediation. So we've got some ideas, but this would be just the first step in getting us a mediator who can do the core of the position of the work. And Sarah has been interested in taking on a lead role as a mediator and doing more of the work, but we'll have support for him within the $20,000 budget the board set, which we've never gone even close to spending down. So yeah, we're just approving a professional services agreement for 1 year with sellers. And was there a question that
sorry, yeah, I think there was a little bit of feedback or someone cut out for a second.
Yeah, sorry, Jonathan. I cut out and didn't realize you were still speaking, so sorry to cut you off. One question I have is, as far as this contract, is this just on like an as needed basis, kind of up to 15 hours per week? But with that in mind, is it like if there's mediation scheduled for the week or scheduled over a period of time, the contractor will complete it? But if cases don't come in, they're not just going to be in the office. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, exactly. Which is different than how the original was, which was I think we had set it up as we'll pay the full 10 hours a week. So if this one is on need, and we'll have some opportunities for our mediator to go do outreach or attend a meeting. Like there was a town hall on housing last week. That would have been good to have our mediator at. So there'll be things like that where we will work with them to set those where we would like them to be sometimes. But yeah, it's going to be on a need basis and what we decide for them they should be doing that week.
All right, that sounds good. And thank you, Deborah, so much for everything you did to bringing this forward and continue to improve this program.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yes, I would echo that and just say we're glad to have Sayer back as the first mediator and now returning for help. I think that's really cool. Okay, any other board comments? Okay, does anyone have a motion?
I'll move that we approve the professional services agreement with Sarah Michael.
McNeil.
McNeil. Sorry.
Nope.
I took my glasses off.
All right.
I will second that now.
By Turlo,
I will second that now, but I don't have to pronounce it.
Seconded by Freeman. Is there any public comment? All right, back to the board. Any other thoughts? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote.
Dr. Brent,
Yes.
Dr. Freeman,
Yes.
Dr. Bertrand,
Yes.
Dr. Hedges,
Yes.
Dr. Geis,
Yes.
Dr. Thurlow.
Yes.
All right, motion passes 6-0 with 1 absence. All right. With that, we're going to close action items and we're going to skip first to reports. So we'll do reports from members of the board. Any board members have reports to share? Okay. I think we've all been pretty good. We've had a robust meeting with many topics, so I think we covered everything. I don't have anything in addition to share. Okay. Any reports from committees? Okay. We'll go to a report from District Council.
Nothing to report.
All right. And report from General Manager.
Great. So I think, like was said, a lot of what I would report on has been on the board agenda, and we've had a lot of discussions on them. Just a couple things to highlight. One is we have our compost collective dirt riders all hired and on board and collecting compost. And again, want to thank Deborah a lot for spending a lot of time helping do those interviews and run that whole process with the other compost collective employees we have. So that was that's great. It was a big effort to hire 6 people at once, which is the most we've ever done. But we got it done. And in doing that, we also now have for the district a timekeeping system that's electronic. And I know that sounds like not that impressive, but for us it is. So now we have a system to better keep our time for all our employees that integrates with our payroll system, and it'll help us with our internal controls and our accountability and transparency of, where's our money going, who's getting paid for which work. So that's just a great little new development for our internal mechanisms. Another report is it took also a huge amount of time between whenever the last board meeting was on, I think, the 23rd of June to last Friday between me and Bob and Deborah, but we also finished our year-end accounting for this year, and that was really successful, I think. And we have a great year-end result. I emailed the board a copy of the balance sheet, but we are officially have filled all of our reserves as we've designated them in the policy. And we might want to revisit that now. It's been almost 2 years since we passed that policy, but we've filled all our reserves, and we have 70,000 in surplus reserves, or not surplus, but reserves that don't have a current designation. So financially really strong as an organization and ready to take on more things as they come up. Another thing I want to report on is that I attended the county cannabis meeting on July 1st, where I thought actually it was going to be kind of a different format and discussion where the community could explain community benefits that it would want, but it looks like we'll be able to engage with that if we want to separately now outside the process. That process has changed a little bit again, it seems. So there's that. And then last week I attended the IV bicycle and pedestrian safety improvement meeting that the county ran, and I'm hoping to get the survey results so I can send them to the board, because there were a lot of survey results that came in and very cool and interesting ideas from the community that are being supported. So yeah, I mean, besides those though, the year-end work has took up a lot in the last 2 weeks. So it didn't allow for, and the hiring and bringing on these staff didn't allow for too much else to report on besides what we got on the board agenda today. So there's a lot more to get done, but you know, it's going to be a busy summer.
Great. Thank you for your report, Jonathan. And I actually was meant to text you earlier, and because I was very excited to see the Compost Collective dirt riders riding around out there with masks on and everything. So very glad to see that that's up and running. Thanks for your work on that.
Can I just add to that? Can I just add to that? Jonathan and Deborah, you know, you guys really have been keeping a whole bunch of balls up in the air and really performing spectacularly. So you have my praise for handling all of these really, really important issues. So keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you. And Deborah reminded me there's one last update to give the board, which is our interns are leaving their employment on August 7th. So we won't have interns after that point, but we're figuring out the timeline of when we want to bring on new ones. So the team will shrink a little bit and grow back again.
Well, please convey our board's thank you to the interns for their service. And I'm sure that they probably didn't think they'd be ending their internships just like this. But we see the work and the fruits of their labor, and we appreciate them. So please convey that. Okay. We are going to go back to item 5, which is closed session. This is the District Council Performance Contract Review authorized under Government Code 54957B1. So with that, we're going to have Jonathan put all members of the public in the waiting room, and we will admit you back and report out after we've concluded.
Just get work on this.
There was no action with respect to rates. It was just a performance review of general counsel.
All right. The next meeting of the Board of Directors is going to take place on July 28th at 6 p.m. It'll be here over Zoom. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Motion made by Freeman. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Bertrand. Any public comment? Right, board discussion. Let's do a roll call vote.
Wait, Director Brandt?
Yes.
Director Geis?
Yes.
Director Bertrand?
Yes.
Director Freeman?
Yes.
Director Hedges?
Yes.
Director Nguyen is absent. Director Thurlow?
Yes.
All right. We'll keep on the lookout for a special meeting if we do call a special meeting, as mentioned earlier in the meeting. But thanks, everyone. We'll reconvene soon.